You're listening to the Wrigleyville Nation podcast. Season ticket holders and lifelong fans with neighborhood ties discuss Cubs news and neighborhood happenings. Here's your hosts, Jeremy and Pat.
Hello and welcome to the Wrigleyville Nation podcast. This is episode 359 of the podcast. My name is Jeremy Deemer and I'll be your host. And I'm joined as always by my co-host. He's my cousin and he's high atop Wrigleyville tonight. How's it going, Pat?
Well, Jeremy, it's a warm and muggy night in Wrigleyville, and apparently there's a concert going on. Someone named Luke something or other, and there are a lot of brand new cowboy boots and cowboy hats adorning young people wandering the streets aimlessly.
That's right. We are deep into second summer, coming off of false fall last week, and moving into the classic seasons of Chicago. It is hot. The Cubs not in town. They are out of town, but we will recap the week that was, and we will preview the week that will be. We've got news to talk about. We've got a lot to unpack, and so we wanted to bring on one of our longtime close personal dear friends to the show. Please welcome back to help us talk everything Cubs, Matt Trueblood. Matt, thanks for taking time out to talk Cubs with us deep into the dog days of August here.
Yeah, love it. It's been interesting.
Interesting is a great way to describe it. So we were not correct in our analysis, Pat, on predicting the week that was last week.
I don't know about that. I said they'd go 10-5 in the nenext 15. I didn't say what order it would be in. They're 4-2. That's we're on track.
Yeah, so for a 4-2 week last week, it was really disappointing when you're seeing this on the schedule. We talked about it. You wanted to at least see a sweep of one of these two teams. Detroit, terrible. Miami, somehow probably worse. Watching that lineup today, it was rough all around. Let's start with the Detroit series at home. We'll start with the positives. Javi Baez returned, and I thought that the video package they did, the fan reaction, the standing ovation, it was great to see Javi Baez get his flowers from the Wrigleyville crowd. But tough to watch him do what he's been doing, go 0 for 4 with 4 strikeouts, Matt. Javi Baez coming back to Chicago.
Yeah, I mean, it was great and it was terrible, which is what we all knew it was going to be, right? It's just, I thought maybe even more than the video that they showed inside the stadium, I loved the little tribute that Marquis put together for the pregame show. It was really good, quick turnaround producing too. They had a bunch of his best highlights interspersed with interviews they'd clearly done that night with fans who were there out on Gallagher Way about what made watching Javi special to them. And it was so many different things to so many different people, the memories of certain plays, but also a lot of folks talking about it was really cool. You know, Chicago has this big Puerto Rican community. A lot of people from that community showed up to these games, to that first game especially, to say thank you and to see again this person who meant a ton to them. And a good reminder that, I mean, there's still an honorary Javier Baez way in Chicago. And all of the memories it brought back were awesome. And then juxtaposing that with the player who's left out there on the field is just a massive bummer, because it's so hard to, not necessarily hard to figure it out, right? It was harder to explain how he succeeded at times than it is to explain how he's failed now. But that's the rational part of your brain talking. And the magic and the wonderfulness of Javi was he let you escape the rational part of your brain. He let you look at baseball and just leave the rational part of your brain aside, because it wasn't going to explain him, but he was going to succeed anyway. And all that's gone now, and that part sucks.
And in fact, he may not play another game this year. And sadly, as incredible as this would sound, and maybe this is overly alarmist, would it be weird if he played his last game ever at Wrigley Field?
Yeah, that part's going to depend a little bit on just how much Javi wants it from here. And I think one thing, it was not reported this way. However, I think it's pretty darn clear. Javi tried to play through some back stuff early this year, went on the shelf like 2 months ago, came back about 3 weeks ago, I think. I'm pretty sure he came back when he really wasn't 100% and played right through the thing getting worse all over again because he wanted to be here, which is important to point out because I think there are a lot of folks for whom a part of the explanation of his backslide and a part of the explanation of his never making some of the sort of the consolidating adjustments that might have taken him to the next level as a hitter. There are people who think that's because he doesn't want it enough. And he's wired different than a lot of ball players, and I don't think he shows the want in the same way as a lot of people. I don't think he shows his passion and his feelings of personal connection to others in the way that a lot of ball players do. I don't think he's an awesome fit in a lot of clubhouses. People don't dislike him. They just don't love him per se. But my thing is, I want people to notice that he went on the injured list immediately after this series. And I don't think it was a coincidence. And I don't think it was the Tigers just doing Javi a favor. It was to some extent because they had some control over that. But I think Javi really wanted to come back and play at Wrigley again. And I don't know if he's going to be on the Tigers after this offseason. There's a pretty decent chance he gets designated for assignment. Where he lands, if he lands again in the majors after that, is hard to project, to be honest. But I think it's still possible. But you're right. It's also possible that that's the last time he'll play on that field, which, again, it's
or any field. Yeah.
I mean, it really could be. And I hope that it's not. I don't think it will be. I think the chances of that are relatively remote. But it's pretty clear he's dealing with some injury. And he's not playing through it well the way at his very best. He played banged up sometimes and was a lot better. Let's put it this way, a lot better at playing while banged up than Chris Bryant was. That is a skill. I've said a lot, even on this podcast. One skill in baseball is avoiding injuries. One skill in baseball is playing well, as some facsimile of yourself, even when you are hurt. Javi was good at the second one at his very best. He's not anymore. But hopefully we're catastrophizing here and he'll be back in some form and maybe even a little better than he's been over the last couple of years starting next season. But I wouldn't be surprised if he's done at least for 2024.
By the way, you brought up an interesting point. When I think of players who played hurt well, the one that always comes to mind for me is Andre Dawson, who played hurt well a lot. So did Bill Buckner, two former Cubs, who, when you see how much they had to wrap their ankles and their feet, especially in the old days of sort of witch doctor medicine, before modern science took over, it's amazing those guys were able to do it. But my question to you two is going to be, do you have a favorite Javier Baez memory?
Go ahead, Jeremy.
Yeah, I think for me, when I think of Javi Baez, I think of the way that the tag at second base became a thing that wasn't a thing. It wasn't an electrifying play, the tag at second base, but Javi Baez made that an electrifying play. That was something it was can't miss. And it was all the highlights and it was great stuff. It was adding that dimension that wasn't something that was a common occurrence in a game. It was a special play by a special player. And I think that's more than just one moment. I think it's every single time it was, Javi flashing the tag. I loved that stuff.
Yeah, that's a good point. And really, there are genres of Javi play that there were several similar ones of, right, that we could choose from as opposed to just picking one. I'll go past. There are a lot of really obvious huge hits in Cubs history. And the Pittsburgh play is going to be a lot of people's top. I will skip past those just for the sake of avoiding the cliche. There was a play when it was September of 2015. and he'd missed most of the season. He stepped away from the game for a little bit after the death of his sister. He came back and they had him in the minors, which I didn't think he should be, and he broke his hand stealing a base. It was September before he got to come up and play for that electrifying team. They were in Pittsburgh, and it was a close game late, 8th inning maybe, and a ground ball to short with what would have been the tying run coming home. And the Cubs had been playing back, conceding the run to getting out because they needed to manage the situation a bit. Except the ball was kind of sharply hit, and Javi read it so well off the bat that even though it was sharply hit, he snagged it on a hop coming in pretty hard and no hesitation. He threw it 95 miles an hour with an exchange of about this to the plate and nailed Pedro Florimon. And that, right, I mean, that's what Javi is at his best to me, is making snap judgments that no other player would make, or if they did, it would turn out calamitously. And occasionally, obviously, it did for him too. But he could make that play that not only took incredible athleticism, but just thinking to do it in the first place was beyond most players.
I do want to share an offensive moment because you mentioned his hitting too, and that game one of the DS against in 2016 against the Giants, the home run off of Johnny Cueto to win that game 1-0, like that.
I think we were there together, weren't we?
That one I watched in London. We were. I did that. Yeah, I was in London for that one. I was
there. Yeah.
You were there. I was watching across the pond. But it was just what a moment on a game where Cueto was so unbelievably frustrating for the Cubs hitters to watch Baez just crush that and win that game. One of my favorite offensive moments from him.
I have Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I was just gonna say that is one of my favorites, just in that it gets played as a highlight and people notice a couple of things: prodigious power in a huge moment, also the strut and the swagger.
Yep.
And then, oh my God, it just barely landed in the basket. What was he doing? And it symbolizes beautifully, though, the fact that when people saw the surface of Javi, they saw one thing. And underneath that surface was a really deep ocean sometimes. First of all, that was a 3-2 pitch, and he had fought like hell to get to that spot in the count. Secondly, this was back when Javi, he had a pretty good-sized leg kick most of the time. He went to 0 leg kick so that Johnny Cueto couldn't mess him up with his timing. On that pitch, he shut down the leg kick, and he still hit the crap out of the ball. And by the way, he was right to strut out of the box because he murdered that thing. The wind was howling in 20 miles an hour, and that's the only reason it wasn't on Waveland. So just the ways that, you know, there's the highlight, and then there's the stuff that makes, even though it looks like maybe Javi got lucky or he, you know, he just, there was always more to his baseball genius than showed up, even in his greatest moments.
So I have two moments for different reasons that I think, you know, both offensive, that I put in my list for favorite Javi memories that I was at in person. That Jeremy was one of them, the Cueto home run, which I do think probably goes down, at least in my mind, as maybe the most underrated home run in Cubs history. That was the 2016 Game 1 playoff series against a tough Giants team that had some good starting pitchers. And as somebody who was at the game, who had lived through, I don't know, a whole life of the Cubs not going to the World Series, and I was having flashbacks of like 2008 and winning like 96 or 7 games and getting swept by the Dodgers. You know, like, I mean, all the negative stuff was going through our heads. And the Cubs were in a 0-0 tie in the 8th inning. I mean, that was a big, big hit. It was almost one of those moments where you could kind of exhale afterwards and say, okay, this is different. Like, we've got this, right? Like, this team is not the teams that we're used to, you know, that cough things up. And so for that reason, that had a lot to do with the impetus for, I think, the Cubs. It was a tough series. People just forget how tough that series was. I mean, tougher than the Dodgers series in many respects, even though I know people view that as a tough one, or the Cleveland one. But, you know, that's the one where they came back at San Francisco in that Game 4. And, you know, it was a hard series, and that was such a huge play. But the other moment that I have that is sort of for different reasons on my list was the Mother's Day home run, the walk-off Mother's Day home run he hit. I think it was it the next year, 17 maybe?
No, it was earlier that same year.
It was 16. Yeah, it was, because I was thinking my dad was still working for the team then. So yeah, so it was 2016, and I was with my mom and my wife and my kids, and so it was, one of those games where, and I think that's right, because my dad told me Javi had his family in town too, which was kind of a rarity, right? They're coming from far away, and they were in town. No pressure or anything, but you've got your family there. I've got my family there. I know that was important to him at the time, and for him to hit that walk-off home run was pretty awesome, and it made a good Mother's Day for my family too. So I always think of those two kind of as two of my favorite, especially of the in-person moments with Javi a lot. But there are so many plays and so many things he did, going all the way back to that first Diamondback series when they first brought him up on the road, and he swung at everything, but boy, when he hit it, he crushed a couple of those pitches for home runs. It's wow, Jason Parks is right. He is this good. Remember? Anyway, so it was nice to be able to see him. I actually didn't get to go to that game. I had to go the next night, where he did not play. The Cubs somberly, sleptwalked through the entire game and lost. But it was. I did see the marquee tribute, like Matt pointed out, and I did see some of the video stuff, and it was I thought well done and well deserved.
You mentioned the next day, the low light of the series, Jameson Taillon doing classic Jameson Taillon things. Our text exchange, Pat, included could have traded Taillon at the deadline, stayed under the luxury tax, got some prospects, but instead this.
Did I say that?
You did, yeah.
Okay, well, heat of the moment. Yeah, enough said.
So it was tough. It was one of those you wanted to see a sweep, but
yeah.
The good news was you were going to see the Cubs go to Miami, where here's a sweepable team, the Miami Marlins. Many times we see a lineup and we say, how is this a team? Who are half these people? It's the Miami Marlins are that type of team. And here we saw the Cubs cruising. They drop the last game on the Sunday. And after it's not the starting pitching's fault. That's for sure. It's a familiar feeling, Matt. We've seen this movie before.
Yeah, I mean I'm not sweating it as hard as some others, because I came on it was around the 4th of July, I think, was one of the last times I was with you guys, and I was telling people this season is done. Not because it was mathematically true. It's still not mathematically true. From here, they'd need to go, maybe we could say 22-9. But that's the thing. It's like they've won their last 3 series, and they still have to go 22-9 from here to make the playoffs. So
today was a lost opportunity, though, right? Like the Braves lose to the Nationals, Cubs lose to Miami. Had the Cubs been able to just, it's a lot to ask somebody to go 5-1 in a week, right? But this is one of those weeks where it really felt doable. And the fact that they weren't able to do it, and the fact that they did go 5-2 or 4-2, to Matt's point, means that moving forward, if the Cubs go 21-10 the rest of the way, which would be to win 2 out of 3 plus 1 game somewhere, the Braves would have to go 15-17, and the Mets would have to go 17-14. And it's asking a lot to have everybody else also suck while you play really well.
Well, and that's the thing. All of the teams in front of you, when you don't take advantage of, when you don't string together a bunch of consecutive victories, then you have what the Cubs are looking at, still under 500, 65-66 as of the time of this recording, still behind the St. Louis Cardinals, the San Francisco Giants, the New York Mets, and the Atlanta Braves for the final wild card spot. And everyone else in the last 10 games, Cubs went 6-4, Atlanta went 6-4, the Mets went 6-4, the Giants went 5-5, the Cardinals went 5-5. So everyone treads water. There's no universe where you could pass that many teams with that few games left.
I mean, really, you guys are saying it in different ways. It comes down to this. They'd have to get blisteringly hot. They needed to start getting blisteringly hot a week and a half ago.
Yep.
They have some tough teams left on their schedule, just a few, but the schedule's pretty soft. It's open to them. You'd have to get 110 win pace hot for almost a quarter of a season. And that's very hard to do. And you have to be a very good team to do it. Even, you're overperforming your level, but you have to start at a certain level just to have that be reachable. And the Cubs just aren't at that level. They're just not that good a team. It's not in this team to do that because their starting pitching is good, but it's not insane. It's not ideal. Shota Imanaga's in the middle of an adjustment curve right now. And Javier Assad is what he is. Sometimes it's going to be good. Sometimes it's going to be 4 2/3. And then it puts a lot of pressure on the bullpen, which, by the way, also has a lot of highlights lately, but is not deep enough. It's just not deep enough to win the number of games that they have to win in the time that's left to them. Because when you win, it puts more pressure on your high leverage bullpen. You have to bring them in more often. They have to start pitching tired, or you got to be able to turn to the last couple of guys on your bullpen bench and say, go protect a narrow lead and have them actually do it a couple of times. It's just not in this team. I don't want to just bring everybody down, but I want to encourage people to think a little differently about the stretch run of this season. There are some interesting things happening. There are a lot of interesting questions that have to be answered about this team. And fortunately, they are playing, we've seen a lot of Miguel Amaya and Pete Crow Armstrong, and we're going to see a bunch more of each. We're going to get some answers to those questions here. But watch them through that lens, and watch them through the lens of, yes, hey, it's really fun to just watch Justin Steele and Shota Imanaga pitch. Watch them through the lens of, Michael Busch has had a great season. Can he finish it strong? Even though he's probably wearing down a bit and pitchers are adjusting to him. Not through the lens of, can they race back and get into the playoffs? Because they can't. They cannot. They can't.
Well, okay. Before we get to the hitters, because I do want to talk about that.
We do. Yes.
2 quick points. One, I took a quick sneak preview of the Braves and Mets schedules for the rest of the year. A little bit harder than the Cubs, but like you pointed out, Matt, the Cubs have 9 tough games against the Phillies, the Yankees, and the Dodgers, and 13 games against pretty bad teams. What it seems so unfair is the Braves and Mets get to play like the Marlins and Nationals also, which really, it seems like they play them a lot. And I know they're in the same division, which probably is the reason for that. But boy, that doesn't help, right? Because as we saw this week with the Marlins, you can get healthy on the Marlins and probably the Nationals too, to a large degree, because these are just not great teams right now. They're bad teams. Unfortunately, everybody gets to play the bad teams. So I guess that's going to be a point against the Cubs. And again, another reason why they need to capitalize on all the wins they can get against the bad teams.
But I think we're getting, just one more point. I think we're only in the second year of this extremely balanced schedule. Not only fewer games within your division relative to the rest of the league, but playing the entire opposite league. The schedule is more balanced than it has been in a quarter century. And for that reason, we're all getting used to seeing the season unfold in a new kind of way. Part of the reason the Cubs are so close to the Braves in the standings is just that the Braves haven't played as many times against the weaker sisters of their division as some of the other teams, like the Diamondbacks and Padres. I haven't even looked at their schedule, but I'm guessing they've probably seen quite a bit of the Rockies already. And maybe that's why they're farther ahead of the Cubs than Atlanta is. Those schedule vicissitudes are harder to pin down and understand until the last few weeks of the season, because it's so hard to keep track of who everybody has and hasn't played. And that's where I come back to, you just look at this team on the field. Are the Cubs capable of winning 22 out of 31? It's very, very hard to do. And if they don't do it, you're relying on a collapse that's unlikely to come. And you wouldn't need that collapse, except that they haven't set themselves up well enough in the first place. That's why you can't just jog up to this point and then try to sprint in. That's not how a marathon works.
You ever watch a track race where one guy starts on the inside, but way farther back, and the guy on the outside gets to start way in front of everybody? And when the gun goes off, the guy on the outside is way ahead of everybody. until they get around enough that the guy on the inside makes up for it with the fact that he has less distance to go because he's on the inside track. I feel like that's sort of how the schedule works a little bit. But, far be it for me to want to play one of our divisional rivals in the last 3 months of the season. I guess that's just MLB's own little fixation. Getting back to the bullpen, I see a lot online about how the Cubs bullpen is the best bullpen in baseball since whatever, 2:00 in the afternoon on July 2nd or whatever, whatever the date is that people use to make it seem good, July 3rd, whatever the date. And it certainly has been overall, I feel like, far better than it was before. And, you can go by a lot of things. You look at ERA. I like to look also at what you do in high leverage situations, because I think that is also relevant. I think if you're down 7-1 and your bullpen pitches 4 shutout innings, that's great. Keeps you, in the game. But if you lose 7-2, it's not really quite as important as if you could have 4 ninth inning, like 1-2-3s, right, in a close game. So I looked at the Cubs bullpen. So I'm going to, this is a blast from the past. Do you remember March, like 29th or 30th of 2024, opening day for the Cubs against the Rangers? I'm going to read to you the Cubs bullpen on that day. Ready?
Sure.
Albert Alzolay, injured list. Almonte, injured list. Quas, your guy, Matt. Quas, cut. Now he's with Toronto, pitching poorly. Al Leiter Jr., traded.
Mark Leiter Jr.
Mark Leiter, I'm sorry. Not Al Leiter. Yeah, sorry.
One of the Leiter
Showing my age, yeah. His grandson, Mark Leiter Jr., traded. Luke Little, injured list. Angel Daris, cut. And then we've got Merriweather and Smiley, still on the team. And now the Cubs have added a hodgepodge of Porters. Porter Hodge, they got Lopez, who they acquired. Miller, who they got technically in a trade, right? Neely, who they traded for. Pearson, who they traded for. And Roberts, who came up from the minors. Ethan Roberts after the injury, sort of, I guess, consider that. He and Hodge are both sort of from the minor leagues. It's interesting if people talk about the roster construction, what the Cubs have done with their bullpen to be better than what they were at the beginning. And I think a lot of the issues early on, though, were injuries. Like Little was pitching well when he got hurt. Almonte was, I think would have been helpful. Alzolay, if healthy all year, would have been super helpful. So I don't really look at that necessarily as guys who would have just been ineffective the entire season. I think they would have really helped had they been healthy, along with the Ben Browns and other guys, maybe even Wisniewski possibly, and others who became injured and have been gone. But you look at the guys they've acquired. I look at these names and yes, they're pitching well, but I don't think anybody would truly, with their like life savings on the line, say, yeah, that's the bullpen we're going to ride to this, fantastic 22-9 finish or whatever it's going to be, and make a run in the playoffs, right? Like these are guys who situationally have matched up well and done all right in limited action, but there's not a single guy on that whole list who I could say with any, and not that you can with relief pitchers necessarily anyway, but when you look at the track record of these guys, Lopez was good a couple of years ago. Most of these guys have never been good at the major league level ever, right? In fact, some of them have been just bad at the major league level, and that's their track record. It's hard to imagine that this group of guys is going to get you where you need to go, and we saw today with Merriweather, sometimes even the most reliable veterans in that group, get blown up, and so it does make me a little bit pessimistic. I guess if there's a reason for pessimism on the pitching side, part of it too is just the thought that they're going to hold up for another 31 games. These guys without showing some cracks. I think it'd be somewhat unrealistic to expect that.
Yeah, I mean, they've got guys who are due for some regression. I wrote about Drew Smiley this week because his numbers have been really solid.
Yeah.
And at the same time, like his surface level numbers have been really solid. And when you look just below the surface, he's striking out fewer batters than even most starters. He is walking a healthy number of hitters. And you just go, how does he get away with this? How does he keep doing it? Now, there are reasons, and the Cubs are actually pretty good. I'll even say very good at some of the little things, the little adjustments, the contact management kind of stuff. This pitch is funky, and we're going to find a way to make it interact with another one of your pitches in a way that is even tougher on hitters. It's part of what they've done with Jorge Lopez, part of what they've done with Tyson Miller. But you nailed it. It's just this is not a bullpen full of guys who throw 98, for one thing, not a bullpen full of guys who miss a whole lot of bats. Some of them rack up strikeouts, but it tends to be through getting the odd called strike in just the right spot or a long, laborious setup to get that swinging strikeout. They don't just come in and plow through a team in 11 pitches and strike out 3. And you're right. It would have been hard to foresee things going as badly as they did with the opening day bullpen. Just the combination of Neris underperforming, Alzolay and Merriweather and Almonte getting hurt. I think Almonte's one that really flies under the radar for people. He wasn't around long enough, and he was so much not the headliner ultimately of the Busch deal. People couldn't really even attach an expectation to it. But I think he would have been a pretty solid addition and sort of a bridge guy who would have given them a lot more stability through that May and early June part where they started to tumble down the standings. And part of it was the offense was really scuffling, and part of it was the bullpen came unglued because Alzolay hit the shelf and Merriweather wasn't coming back and they were out of options. I think Almonte could have done a lot for them, and he was there for part of that, but not very much of it. And to lose him for the balance of the season was a real blow. So you're right. It's just they didn't do as bad a job as it's going to end up looking like of building a bullpen this year. And they did a great job of patching on the fly, which they do pretty much every year. Their projects work at a higher rate than most other teams' projects.
But if it costs you a season every year because you don't get it
because it takes
away for 3 months, it's frustrating.
And that is a problem. And it's hard to pin down because obviously the solution is not to go out and spend a whole bunch of money in free agency on a relief pitcher. If you can find one that you really trust, great, do it. But there were a lot of folks who were upset that the Cubs weren't the ones who signed Robert Stevenson for 3 years and $30 million or something this winter. He's not even going to pitch this year. So there's a lot of risk anywhere when you're building a bullpen. You know what the answer is? It's build a better lineup. There were so many games they lost that looked like they were the bullpen's fault, but it was really the lineup couldn't tack on a run here. The lineup couldn't push across a run late to narrow a gap and even give Craig Counsell an excuse to use his high leverage guys. The cure for the volatility of bullpens, especially when it comes to the Cubs, who are good at managing that volatility as it is to get a better offense. And we circle back to a problem they've been having for quite a while now.
Speaking of that, the Cubs played at least 3, if not almost 3 months of the season with 2 middle relief pitchers batting in their lineup on a daily basis. And now they've been replaced by Aaron Judge. So what's going on with that? Tell me about this Pete Crow Armstrong that you are skeptical of, and Miguel Amaya. And what they've done in the last month is fairly remarkable considering where they were. I mean, I thought they couldn't be any worse than they played the first half of the year, right? Mm-hmm. But I didn't think they could play as well as they've been able to sustain this for the last month now.
It is hilarious. Just the perfect encapsulation of this season that they were like the very worst team in baseball at the bottom of the order for 3 months.
They were literally the worst hitters in all of baseball. Now they're the best.
Oh, wow. And now it's like the best 8 and 9 hitters in the league. And even if you slid them up to the middle of the order, they'd be fine.
They're better than Horner and Swanson now for this season. I mean, that's
set a higher bar. But yeah, it's 2 totally different cases. And I've written already a bit about this, about Amaya, and we'll write about PCA this week. But the problem that they shared in common early was just swinging at everything. And I came on here and talked before about just how much PCA was swinging, more than Javi Baez ever did.
Right.
Just
that scared me.
Chasing everything. And Amaya was not quite as bad, but basically as bad, which is atrocious. You can't have 2 people at the bottom of the order who just hack at everything. They don't even make a pitcher throw some pitches. Useless, hopeless. And they've both kind of been fixed for now. They've made at least important adjustments, We've heard a lot about Miguel Amaya's switching to that toe drag, toe turn, whatever you want to call it, in his swing to give him more balance. We've seen PCA go from a pretty quiet front foot to more of a true leg kick that's in rhythm, and it's pretty and it's creating more power. Now, here's the thing. Starting with PCA, he's still swinging a whole lot, like a lot. Like this year or this month in August, his swing rate is 57.5%. It's down like 5 percentage points from his 2 previous months, but it's still there have been like 1,500 player months this season in which a guy had at least 40 plate appearances. This month, the PCA is in, which is a drastic reduction from his last couple, ranks like 110th on that list. He's swinging a lot, and mainly the difference this month has been he is swinging at over 83% of pitches in the zone and only 32.6% of pitches out of the zone. Now, 32.6% chase rate, that's still above the league average, but he's brought it way down to that number. And 83% swinging within the zone is nuts, is impossible. It's just like it's a statistical anomaly. So what's PCA doing, and is this sustainable? What he's doing is seeing the ball incredibly well, and he's on a heck of a hot streak. Is it sustainable? Not in its current form, no. He's hitting the ball harder, and he's hitting it hard more frequently, and that's all really good. And I like the swing a lot better. It looks better right now. And the approach issue is still going to come back. Pitchers are going to find another new way to pitch to him. It's all going to happen before the end of the season. You will see them adjust to him again, and he'll go into a 2 or 3 week funk before this year is out. He's not done.
Sorry, we don't have time for that. There's only 31 games left. We can't afford a 2 to 3 week slump.
I told you already. They can't afford something that is going to happen. That's why, again, this team's
but
going
does this
anywhere.
Does this give you more optimism long term for his viability? I mean, you've seen the defense now. You've seen the speed, both on the bases, running the bases, the inside the park home run, which was fantastic.
Mm-hmm. Success stealing bases.
Some of the bunts. You've seen it in different formations. Yeah, the stealing bases. So the speed is real. The defense is real. And not just real, but like he's one of the best at those two things in all of baseball. Like he's one of the fastest players on the bases in baseball. So the thing we always talked about was, well, the bat has to be at least a certain level. Doesn't have to be great, but it has to be a certain level to justify the other skills. Have you seen enough now to say that, realistically there's a chance that he can do this? Or
do you guys remember the comp I threw on him when we talked about him a couple of months ago?
Wasn't good, was it?
We're not. I don't want to create bad radio here. It was Corey.
Was it Corey Patterson? Was it
Corey Patterson?
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah.
And so I say that to, I guess, help elucidate why I'm going to say this, which is I am nowhere near giving up hope on the guy. I also am not overwhelmingly encouraged by this month because Corey Patterson had 3 months like this. The first half of 2003,
was almost an all-star in 2003, but until he tripped over first base and broke his ankle.
We can't rewind history and replay it and figure out whether he was going to go into a slump anyway in that 2003 season. And I think he might have been. My evidence for that is the rest of his career. But there, even, he didn't really crater and come completely undone until 2005 when he just sort of broke. In 2004, there was a much more mixed bag version of Corey Patterson with a bunch of the power showing. The speed was awesome. The defense was incredible. I really have yet to see anything that materially separates PCA from Corey Patterson for me. It is top of the scale speed. It's above average raw power, at least, although I don't think he's going to get to it consistently, just like Corey ultimately didn't get to it consistently. It all comes down to the hit tool, which in both of their cases, it's not about can they meet the ball squarely or squarely enough to reach base and do damage given their extraordinary strength and speed. It's just about, can they stop swinging at everything? And it's a really hard question to answer because some guys do. Some guys make that switch. Sammy Sosa made that switch. Most guys don't. Most guys, if they get even this far and they've shown no semblance of the ability to not swing, it never really comes around. And they may go on hot streaks, but they have more cold streaks, and they end up a playable but below average hitter. You can put him in the lineup and be reasonably happy with him because he's a top of the scale defender. I'm describing now something more like Kevin Pillar or Kevin Kiermaier than the star that obviously he can be if he puts it all together. It's not too late to keep dreaming on that. And again, there are guys, there are examples. And if there weren't examples, we could still believe it might happen because new stuff's happening all the time in baseball. But I see what he's doing this month, and all I see is a version of the same thing that he's been, only he's seeing it really clear right now. And that doesn't last. You're not going to see the ball well for an entire season. You're not going to be in this hot streak mode. So he's going to have to make a material approach adjustment. This approach will never turn him into a star. He'll have to come back next year or learn even this year to do things materially different, swing less, cut the plate in half, be more count specific, count sensitive in his approach. He's not any of that right now, but he could eventually become it. He's only 22. It's fun to watch right now. It's just,
it is. Yeah.
It doesn't make me more confident in the future, really.
What is it about the Cubs where PCA swings at everything, makes him a streaky hitter? Seiya Suzuki doesn't swing at anything, makes him a streaky hitter. I don't get it. Like we're just this team. Maybe it's just my imagination because I watch him too much, but this team feels so streaky up and down the lineup. I don't know. Like everybody gets really hot and really cold. I just wish there were some guys in this lineup who were just like day in and day out, kind of the same. I don't know. It'd be nice, but
a guy like Miguel Amaya he was a guy who was doing a lot of the same that we didn't like, and that was not being good for the majority of the season. I told him that leg kick
was not a good idea, and he didn't listen to me.
A guy who's having a pretty good August is, he's a guy that we've heard a lot about for a long time. This was supposed to be his year and his time to shine. What is going on? You mentioned you wrote about it. What's going on with Amaya, and has he turned a corner? Is he a guy, or is he the guy we've saw for most of this year?
What I would say is what he's done has me more like I've increased my estimation of his offensive potential and just likely output in the next year more over the last month or two than I have with PCA, because he went through this pretty clear progression. You can see in the numbers and the mechanics and all of it. He went from that leg kick that he's had, they say basically since he was a teenager, he's always swung that way. And he went to this thing where he just sort of turns the toe up the way Shohei Ohtani does. Well, when you say someone does something the way Shohei Ohtani does, you're saying, obviously he gets away with that because he's a super freak.
Yeah.
Amaya, even in his cage work before he implemented that toe turn in games, was saying, I don't feel where I'm going to get my power from. I feel really weak swinging this way. But they told him to stick with it. They basically said, you got nothing to lose, man. You've been such a disaster at the plate.
Your OPS is 505. So,
yeah.
Go for it.
And that was boosted by some early April success. I mean, it had been really atrocious.
When they bring John Lester in to help you with your swing, you got some problems as a hitter.
So they made him stick with this difficult thing that was very uncomfortable. And early in the adjustment process, he made approach improvements, and he started being able to manage pitches that he just wasn't able to kind of time up at all. He was timing them up now, but his swing was materially slower. So he lost exit velocity. He lost swing speed, in the bat tracking metrics. Everything sort of dipped, except his overall production rose slightly because he was walking more. He was striking out less. He was hitting balls to open space on the field. And what really has me interested and encouraged is that over the last couple of weeks, you've seen him figure out how, with this new set of moves that he understands the value of, having seen his numbers rise in the right direction for a little while, he's gotten the swing speed back and he's gotten the exit velocity back. And if he has learned, because it's not like only Shohei Ohtani who can do this, there are other examples of guys who go to a quiet front side where you just sort of turn the knee in and show the pitcher the underside of your cleat on the front foot and then stride forward into it. It's just a natural rotation. It's balanced. You can still find power in it. It just takes a while. I think he found it. I think he found out how he can have basically the swing he used to have, but more under control. That's awesome. That's important. Now, at the same time, why is PCA playable even if he doesn't make a lot of progress from here? Top of the scale defender. Miguel Amaya is not a top of the scale defender. No. And so I think it's like, you look around the league, how many bat first backup catchers do you see? Not many. So he's really got to hit, and or he's got to shore up what we've seen, which is kind of a step back as a framer and a overall defensive catcher this year. If he can get back to being even just on the low side of average defensively, I think the bat's going to carry him and make him playable. It's going to be important to watch both sides of the ball down these final 6 weeks of the season, because they got to make a decision, and they may need to say, going into next year, you're our backup, but that's not a long-term plan because you're bat first. So either show us your defense has improved and maybe you can get promoted back to being the starter, or we're going to have to move on or move you off the position or whatever that looks like. But at this point, I will say, I think his bat is going to be good enough. It's just a matter of if the glove's going to come back up enough where he can be an everyday catcher, because you don't want to back up who you don't really trust as a defender or in helping pitchers game plan.
We hear a lot about this guy in AAA, Ballesteros, small person, hits really hard, a lot of good bat, not probably defensively the catcher you're looking for. Sounds like they would be a bad tandem then, right? To have two hit first catchers who are young. You'd want to have at least one guy who can play better defense.
You know what's interesting is I wonder if one of the free agents the Cubs will target most aggressively this winter is not a player. It's Charlie Green of the Brewers, who is the longtime catching coordinator and instructor in their system, who came up to the big league staff this year. The Brewers put him on the big league staff specifically so Craig couldn't poach him and bring him with him to Chicago.
And look what happened to Contreras. I mean, he's having a fantastic season.
Yeah, I mean, the Brewers for the last most of a decade have been one of the best framing instruction teams in the league. They bring a guy in and they actually make him materially better. And they also just have a great sort of symbiotic conversation style. You know, we're going to game plan excellent against the team, and then you're also going to expand the strike zone a little bit. They're really good at that stuff. If the Cubs can get a guy like Charlie Green in the door, maybe you say, yeah, and you know, they went and kind of handpicked a catching guy. Strittmatter is his name, I think, who's on the staff this year, who's an old buddy of Craig's from the Rockies system 30 years ago. But if they could get Green, you maybe are more open to bringing back Amaya and making him and Ballesteros sort of the short-term plan. See if you can coach one or both of them up to the point that you're comfortable with their defense, because their offense actually complements each other beautifully. One righty, one lefty, and they can really hit for the position. You'd be getting an edge. You'd be, for instance, getting back some of what you lose by having a player in left field whose glove is fantastic, but bat is fine, but not great for left field, you know? So maybe if they can get Green, and I know it sounds silly to be like, well, maybe part of their offseason strategy depends on whether they can hire this particular coach, but it really might be something like that. If not, then I think they have to entertain trading either Ballesteros or Amaya, one of the two, and you can pick, and it might depend on what else is available to you. Make the other one kind of your plan B and try and go get plan A this winter.
Well, let's look ahead to the week that will be. The Cubs on the road 3 games at Pittsburgh. Lucky Cubs get all 3 of the good Pittsburgh starters. We get a lot of Skeens over the next 2 weeks here. You've got
before they shut him down for the season, right?
Of course, yeah.
Right after that second Cubs start, they'll be like, "That's enough."
3 at Pittsburgh, 3 at Washington. 2 bad teams. Pat, we'll start with you and your prediction over the next 6 games.
Well, I feel like compared to Matt here, I'm the optimist when it comes to the Cubs.
So I'm starting with you first.
and yet, I'm still thinking that the Cubs could go 3-3 this week. I mean, I hope they go 4-2, but I don't know. It just seems like, look at the matchups. It's always hard to tell, but you look at the matchups. I'm like, 3-3 would be I think they lose 2 out of 3 to Pittsburgh and win 2 out of 3 at Washington. 6 road games in a row after playing 3 road games in Miami. And, I know that's probably not good enough to get them where they need to be, but I'd say 3-3 and hope for the best. Hope they do a little bit better than that.
Matt, what do you think about a 3-3 week?
This is something I do a lot. I think they could go 4-2. I do. All that stuff I just said about some of the fundamental problems with this team, they could still go 4-2 this week. It's the Pirates and the Nationals. Now,
of course they could.
Yeah, well, okay. I guess what I'm saying is, if you're going to pin me down, I think they will. I think they'll win 4 of 6. It's not good enough. They actually have to be better than just winning 2 out of 3 the rest of the way, even though they've won 2 out of 3 the last 9 games, too. That really underscores the predicament they're in. But I do think they'll win 4 of 6 because they're playing pretty well and they might get healthier. I think we could see Jordan Wicks return. And they're just better than these 2 teams.
Well, I hope you're right.
Yeah, 4 out of 6. I will agree with Matt on this one. I think it's a 4-win week for the Cubs. And next week, we will dive into an exciting part of the schedule here. Over the last 6 weeks here, we will talk about the remainder of the season as the calendar will turn to September next time we podcast. So a lot to look forward to there as we head down the home
80% of this season has been played. Over 80% now.
That is correct.
Wow.
And that means that a lot of the season of 1984's Cubs has also been played, as we love to parachute in every single week to the 1984 Cubs season. We celebrate the 40th anniversary of that team by looking at what they did this week in 84 Cubs history. Pat, take us there.
Much like the Cubs of 2024, the 1984 Cubs went 4-2, taking 2 out of 3 from Houston and 2 out of 3 from Atlanta. Now, the difference is they had a 3-game lead over the Mets in first place in the division, and to start the week, and they ended the week 5.5 games up. So the Mets started to slide, the Cubs did well, and this was sort of the beginning of the end for the rest of the National League East, as we used to call it back then, that the Cubs were in. A couple notes here. Rick Sutcliffe again, doing what Rick Sutcliffe did that year. He won his 16th game on August 24th. He pitched 9 innings, gave up 5 hits and no runs. We call that a complete game shutout, or we used to. I don't know what you call it now. You'd call it like a miracle, I guess, but that's what we called it back then. And then the very next day, August 25th, I was able to attend the game. I got my ticket stub right here. So,
if you're watching on YouTube, you can see Pat's ticket stub.
Don't remember much about it other than the ticket was for section 235, so that would have been the grandstands, $5 for a seat.
Show that ticket again to the camera.
Yeah, here we go. See that? So $5. Dirty little secret is you could usually get a little bit closer than your seat back in those days, but it was a Saturday, so it was probably crowded. And I got to go to the game that they lost that weekend, of course, my luck. Brad Kaminsky hit a 2-run homer for the Braves, and the Cubs lost every other run it was a 3-2 loss, and the other 3 runs scored in the game by both teams are all scored on outs. So it wasn't exactly the most memorable of games. Cubs scored their runs. I guess they scored 1 on a wild pitch and 1 on a ground out double play. So, not a lot to root for as a fan, but they came back the very next day when I was not there. Steve Trout pitching. He pitched a 9-inning game, gave up 8 hits and 0 runs to get his 12th win of the game. I'm trying to think of the last time a Major League Baseball team had 2 pitchers in one series pitch complete game shutouts. Like, it's probably been a while, I would think, right?
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
And let me give you, so here's Trout's week overall, by the way. He pitched earlier in the week and on the 20th, and he went 9 innings, gave up 6 hits and 1 run. That 1 run he gave up was on a ground out double play, which, you know, when the Cubs had a lead in the game, that's what you kind of want to do, is get the 2 outs. So for the week, he pitched 18 innings, gave up 1 earned run, 14 hits, and got 2 wins.
Wow.
Don't see that very often either, do you? 2 complete games in 1 week.
That might be even rarer than the 2 teams. 2 shutouts by a team in 1 series. It's If you throw a complete game these days, they bubble wrap you for the next 2 weeks.
Right.
Extra rest, and you come out after 76 pitches the next time. And
I just wanted to highlight a few things about Steve Trout. Last week we talked a little bit about Ron Say. Steve Trout, by the way, in 1984, famously the son of Paul Dizzy Trout, who pitched for the Tigers against the Cubs in the 45 World Series. We heard a lot about that when the Cubs were in the World Series in 2016. And Steve Trout came to the Cubs in a trade in 1983 from the White Sox. That's back one of those rare crosstown trades where the Cubs would fleece the Sox yet again, just like they did with Sammy Sosa. The Cubs got not only Steve Trout, but Warren Brewstar, who pitched out of the bullpen moderately effectively in 1984. Trout had a career year that year, too. And the Cubs gave up, I swear I must have a baseball card with these guys and on future prospects and their faces on there. Scott Fletcher, Randy Martz, and Pat Tabler, all future stars who were never stars. And also Dick Tidrow, Dirt, as we called him, who was the setup man for Bruce Sutter, but Sutter was gone, and Lee Smith had taken over, and he had the Les Lancasters of the world. So no more need for Dick Tidrow. But the Cubs gave up 3 failed future stars, who I think by this point in time had pretty much been exposed as not people who you would expect much from. I do vaguely remember Randy Martz threw a palm ball. Have you ever heard of that? They don't do that anymore, but that was his claim to fame, the palm ball. I remember as a kid trying to reproduce a palm ball, probably about as effectively as Randy Martz did, frankly. But they weren't the best pitchers. Scott Fletcher and Pat Tabler were sort of, infielders who, I think maybe Pat Tabler was the one who was really good with the bases loaded, but only with the bases loaded. So he had kind of a specialty, a skill set, if you will, but a narrow skill set. And the Cubs got Steve Trout out of it. And again, another Dallas Green pickup. I got to give him credit for that. And he was an instrumental part in the 1984 season, won 2 complete games this week. And I got to tell you, as we've gone through week by week and I'm looking at every box score, they were pitching the hell out of Lee Smith that year. I mean, he wasn't just pitching the 9th inning. He was coming into the 8th inning most of the time. So this guy was throwing a lot of innings. And it was nice to have a week where he had 3 complete games out of 6, right? Because it really did take the pressure off. And I don't think Lee Smith had to pitch at all this week. So it was kind of nice for him to have some time off. And the Cubs expanded their lead 5.5 games up headed into next week. So everything was looking good for the 1984 Cubs.
If you want to know more about Steve Trout, go to WrigleyvilleNation.com, our website. You click on all the podcast episodes in the past. You can go to August 8th, 2016, Wrigleyville Nation Podcast, episode 104, where we sat down and had a conversation and a long interview with Steve Trout. So highly recommend that. If you haven't heard it, go back. It's in the archives. It's for free right now. You can listen to episode 104, our interview with Steve Trout.
I have subsequently sat in the bleachers with Steve Trout for a baseball game, but that's a whole nother story for another day.
And you weren't just swamped by autograph seekers. Weird.
He is an author. He is an author of children's books. So there.
That's awesome.
But you didn't know that. Yeah.
And it's always great. We'll be back every single week, checking in on the 1984 Cubs. And spoiler alert, it will be a lot more interesting and exciting than the remainder of the 2024 Cubs season.
That's what you guys say. Trust me. Like the Cubs can go 5-1 this week and then look.
You said they're going to go 3-3, though.
Well, yeah,
Talking out both sides of your mouth.
I suppose they'll go 3-3 if you made me guess, but you never know. Like, hope springs eternal, and if they do, they're so close to just 1 or 2 good weeks in a row. A Braves collapse, a Mets collapse, a Cardinals and Giants collapse, and the Cubs are right there.
Yeah.
Oh, ye of little faith, as Harry Carey would say.
It's amazing how time flies when we're talking Cubs with our friend Matt Trueblood. Matt, please remind all of our listeners where they can find your work on the internet. We referenced a bunch of pieces you wrote. How can they find those?
Northsidebaseball.com is going to be the big one. I'm also writing at Baseball Prospectus. This year I've sort of taken as a beat both Central divisions. So some of those pieces will be directly about the Cubs. Some will touch on the Cubs in a broader context, but check that out for sure. But Northsidebaseball.com is going to be a great place where we're growing all the time. We got some new writers we're working in that I'm excited about. So please come check us out.
You can follow us on all the social media platforms at Wrigleyville Nat. You can also support the show by going to our YouTube channel. Even if you don't consume the video version of podcasts, we could use your help in trying to grow the channel because there's a whole bunch of other Cub fans out there that don't know about the podcast, that are finding it, discovering it via YouTube. So please, every subscription helps us work the algorithm so other Cub fans can find the show. So if you can, take a second. When you're on YouTube, we know you're already going there at some point. Pull up Wrigleyville Nation Podcast. Give us a subscribe. That helps us out a ton. And that's also where you can find the video version of this podcast. You can see Pat showing off his ticket stub and all kinds of fun stuff over there. So appreciate that. And if you have Cub fan friends that don't know about the show, you can tell them how to subscribe to this podcast as well on all social media, all podcast platforms, anywhere where you find podcasts. We're everywhere. And WrigleyvilleNation.com, of course, is the website that has the entire back catalog. I mentioned that Steve Trout episode, the entire back catalog of this podcast, as well as all the links I described. You can find it all there at WrigleyvilleNation.com. And with that, we're going to wrap it up and call it a podcast. Pat, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thanks again, everyone, for listening. And we'll talk to you again next time.